afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Michael. I'm the Director of the Undergraduate Courses and the Professional Experience Coordinator for Eastern College Australia. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you who have joined us this afternoon with an interest in studying with Eastern and MST. There will be a time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please use the Q&A to post your questions that you would like us to respond to. This webinar will be recorded and everyone who is registered for the open day will receive access to it after today. I would like to introduce Jennie Bickmore-Brand, our Dean of Education, who will be presenting this session to you. Jennie's career has largely been in the higher ed sector, where she taught in South Australia and Western Australian universities as Director of Teacher and Learning at Murdoch University. She taught the Tertiary Teaching Graduate Diploma and Mentoring Program for Women Academics. As Dean of Graduate Education with Alpha Crucis from 2005 to 2010, she taught in the Masters of Leadership program and developed their Masters of Teaching course. Australians Together also commissioned her to research into how Australian universities prepare teachers to teach Indigenous students. Jennie is an adjunct with Alpha Crucis supervising PhDs and is a lead researcher with them also, and with Christian Heritage College on graduate attributes. Jennie has an international ministry mentoring leaders and as a previous head of primary at Lake Joondalup Baptist College and inaugural principal at Lindisfarne Anglican Parish College, Jennie is a sought after consultant to Christian schools. Jennie has a heart for all those involved in raising the next generation and believes in the transformative power of Christian education. So we really look forward to hearing from Jennie now as she shares on the topic of Christian education in Australia. Where do I fit in? Thank you, Jennie. Over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll just share my screen add my welcome to all of you who have logged on. It's a pity we can't be face to face because that's really where we're at the moment, isn't it? We're struggling to straddle both worlds. But I guess you're getting very good at sitting and listening, and I hope you'll find this stimulating. But maybe you're sitting there thinking, this is really what I want to do. This is something I've always wanted to do since I was a little kid. I wanted to be a teacher. I used to have all my dolls or whatever sitting up and I used to teach them, or my brothers and sisters, I used to teach them. Or maybe you were really good at Sunday school. I guess there's a little bit of a teacher in most of us in some shape or form. But the question we've got today is Christian education in Australia, and that is a slightly different ballgame, because being a Christian educator carries with it quite a mantle, and we'll talk about that as we go through. So Eastern College actually has as its mission statement something that's worthwhile just sitting with just for a minute. Eastern College Australia provides teaching, training and research from a Christian worldview that contributes to the church and the flourishing of humanity through the lives of its graduates. Eastern College Australia will be recognised for university quality education from a Christian worldview. So I guess we're saying right up front that whilst you're going to get qualifications that you can get and that are recognised at any university in Australia and internationally, it has a DNA to it, if you like, that is distinctly Christian worldview. In Australia, you are allowed to have these distinct views, but you must also provide other perspectives. And in our courses, we do have different worldviews, and you're always introduced to a range of worldviews. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, when did you fall in love with learning? This is a picture of my grandson when he was little. He's now 14 and much bigger than me. He went to a Roman mechanics exhibition that was going around Australia. Maybe you caught it at the time. And he was just fascinated. And I just noticed whether we were sat on escalators or elevators or wherever we were, he was always looking at how things worked. But I wonder whether you were always interested in how things worked, always interested in what kind of things, how things worked, how they benefited people. And here I am looking at something, and I wonder whether you know what that actually is. Maybe you can put in the chat what you guess it is. And Sarah can see if there's any clever people out there. So I'll tell you now that you're going to be in England, and you're going to be in the northern part. And you're looking at a canal. Anyway, we'll see how you go. We'll get back to that one. Whilst you're listening, you might want to take some notes, and because there's the teacher in me, I've broken it up into a little framework, so that you're not just taking things down as they're said, but you can quickly find what was mentioned, so that there's a space here for something that's positive, a space here for something that's negative, something you found interesting, something you really want to try yourself, maybe something you've got some questions about, you want to contact us about, and maybe God is prompting you in particular, and you want to capture that now. So let's go to the next one. Knowing what to teach in Australia today is affected by many issues. One of the things that we're noticing is that there's huge changes in the curriculum. And in fact, Minister Tudge has just commissioned a review of all the things that we teach across Australia. There's obviously changes in the modes of delivery, and there's also changes in society's understanding of what teachers should and shouldn't be doing. Become a lot more controlled about what teachers can and cannot say. And the composition of our classes have changed. They say there's 1 in 6 kids in our classes that have got some kind of disability or learning challenge in some way. There's been huge changes in the expectations of parents, and maybe some of you are teachers and you're listening to this and you're nodding because you know that the hypervigilant parenting styles can be very, very crushing, particularly for Christian schools. Maybe the expectations of employers have changed, and certainly in the case of Christian schooling, we're challenged in a lot of the learning areas to find teachers who actually have the qualifications in the specific learning areas that we need across the board. And there's changes in the expectations of government. As I said, we live in a democracy that allows at the moment us to have Christian schools, but this is something that we are not to relax about and take for granted going forward. Now, one of the things that I can see as underlying a lot of this kind of, I guess, movement is this whole notion about common knowledge. And I wonder if you've ever thought about common knowledge, because knowledge doesn't seem quite as common anymore. Are there now fewer widely accepted facts and shared values and practices and norms? A philosopher, Mike Wilby, argues common knowledge is essential for a thriving democracy. He's saying that we need to have a shared knowledge for us to understand and understand where one another's coming from. But it's undermined by our increasingly polarised politics and society. And I'm sure you just need 5 minutes watching the news on any channel, really, and you'll see this polarisation. And Dr. Wilby says understanding how we gain common knowledge is essential to protecting it. Ludwig Wittgenstein was a philosopher particularly known for his linguistics, but he used the analogy of a metaphor of a riverbed when he was talking about common knowledge. And he said that it's like riverbanks along which the river can flow. So all of our arguments and all of our inquiries and all of our ideas flow along a bedrock of common knowledge. That's the case for each of us. The underlying bedrock of common knowledge, it's something that roots us, we're grafted to, if you like. So God is no longer what we call common knowledge. So something which might have been common knowledge might pop up from the riverbed, if you like, flow up and become part of the flowing river and flow away. So an example of that would be the existence of God and the belief in the existence of God. That used to be part of our common knowledge. That used to be part of the riverbed. It used to be an assumption which everyone took for granted. So if we think of the early medieval period, it structured everyone's life. The existence of God was something that was basic and fundamental to everyone that you met. Now we understand the existence of God to be something that people no longer have as common knowledge, but rather it's a choice. It's something that you can't assume everyone has. And I think this is having a huge effect on our democracy in Australia. Now, I've purposely made this very blurry because it's just horrific to read, and I don't really want you to read it because it's an insult to God, but it's a statement by Richard Dawkins, which if you know him, you wouldn't be surprised. But people like Richard Dawkins have got powerful influences on what we're now understanding to be common knowledge. So Richard Attenborough, as you would know, is having a huge impact on what we're understanding to have common knowledge about in as far as climate change is concerned. We've recently had the George Floyd terrible situation in America, and all of us have had our psyche challenged about what is the common knowledge of Black oppression and where do we sit in this. So as a Christian teacher, your common knowledge influences how you teach. So if any of you are sitting there at the moment, I wonder how this sits with you. What would you think you'd be communicating to students? Because all of your assumptions, all of your arguments, all the ways you're talking and being in front of the student is actually going to be affected by whether you believe God exists, whether you believe God has agency in your life, whether you believe God has agency in the children's life. And we also need to understand that schools form and shape the next generation. The schools are the most dominant effect outside the family home, of course. And school curriculum changes. And I was listening to Geraldine Doog, who actually is a Catholic presenter, quite renowned presenter on Radio National. And she reminds us, after all, school curriculum embodies what society or culture decides are the values it identifies. It wants to hand on to the next generation, which is pretty big and, as you know, highly debated. Now, there are competing pressures on teachers because there are a lot of different interest groups who want to see their values, their religions, and whatever reflected in the curriculum. And they'll often be critical that the curriculum overrepresents other views and other traditions. Now, this statement was made by Jeff Masters, who heads up ACR, the Australian Council for Education Research, and many of you would know NAPLAN, the test that all of our kids regularly take across our primary and early secondary schools. See, the issue is we have different interest groups being pitted against one another as if it's a binary debate. So one of the examples is phonics versus whole language. But we've got a problem when we keep casting our language, our rhetoric in the news, in our parliament, as if it's one or the other, this binary. And Western politics, Westminster system is like a debate. And I was interested when I was at the Knesset in Jerusalem. I spoke to several of the ministers there and said, you know, how's Parliament? Because it looked very, very different to the aggressive debating style in Australian politics. And he laughed and said, well, there's 12 tribes of Israel, so you're going to get at least 12 different opinions as you go around the room. And isn't that an interesting mindset if you come prepared to have different points of view as opposed to win your one argument? So I guess what's really important to think about is what we teach and how we embody those interests, because they've all got a lobby group to some extent that's lobbying, and even we do, our Australian Christian lobby, is lobbying for our interests to be represented in the curriculum. So the Australian Christian lobby put this out for us in education. The Year 7 students who were formerly taught Australia is a secular nation and a multi-faith society with a Christian heritage. In the new curriculum, they'll be told Australia is a culturally diverse, multi-faith, secular, pluralistic society with diverse communities, such as the distinct communities of First Nations Australians, but no mention of the word Christian. Now, I'm sure as you're listening and reading that, you can almost hear the lobby groups that might have ended up with getting that statement being part of the new curriculum. Well, as Jennifer Gore, a lecturer at University of Newcastle, will remind us, the enacted curriculum, that is what teachers actually deliver, is what really shapes students more than what is prescribed, because teachers have always made their own decisions about how to enact the curriculum. We teachers, she says, dwell on what bits to skip over, what bits to combine, and so on. So she reminded us what was mentioned previously about the lack of the mention of Christianity. She says a lot of teachers are going to portray a Christian perspective on the teaching of those kind of issues because that's who they are. In some ways, that matters more than whether the word Christianity is in the formal documentation. So she's saying that in the classroom, we teach from who we are. Now, I've got a PhD student at the moment who's looking at how we teach health. And she's got this coding at the moment of a whole lot of teachers. And she's noticing that the teachers that have some kind of worldview, as you can see in the top right, a Christian theism or a religious theism, is likely to be a high sharer of their life, high sharer of how they make the choices and the decisions that they do. Whereas the non-sharers were the more post-modernism, more existential teachers. Now, this is an interesting shift, isn't it? And this is saying exactly what Jennifer Gore was saying, that we teach out of our perspective, we teach out of our worldview. Now, I'm going to share with you some of the results of a Carter survey that was done. It was actually done in America and then repeated in Australia, and looking at alumni from around about, I think it was about nearly 5,000 students that had recently graduated and gone through school since the early 2000s. And the students reflected themselves. And one of the comments from one of the alumni was, no school is truly neutral to ultimate questions about the purpose of education and normative questions about the kinds of people these students should become. These are questions of ideals and value, moral questions. Now, whether schools like it or not, this is what's going on in schools. They're dealing with values and ideals and morals. You see, in a secular university, a teacher training course, you're going to learn about how the learner learns. You're going to learn about how to cope with their prior knowledge, what they bring with them in the classroom, their stages of development. You're going to be given lots of interesting ways to teach students. You're going to be shown what tests you have to be able to perform on students and that they have to be able to achieve well in. And out of that come a whole lot of learning outcomes. Obviously, knowledge, for example, how to read and write, skills, some of them physical, some of them mental, some of them emotional, and some values. This is a secular teaching course across Australia, of which I think there's 47 that are teaching some degree of initial teacher education. But here we are at Eastern. What are we trying to do? Well, legally, we have to do all of that as well. What the secular university to do, and we have to do as well. But notice what else we are doing. We're actually intentionally teaching about learning outcomes that have character traits, things like good manners, self-control. Some of these things directly are the fruits of the Spirit, aren't they? We're teaching about vision, of having a life of hope, a sense of love and compassion. These are virtues, higher order aspirations for our students than just, yes, they will need to know how to read and write. Is that something that captures your imagination? Is the shaping of the next generation of Australians capturing your imagination? Now, the other thing about universities is that they actually have, I guess they're not aligned, other than something like an Australian Catholic University, they're not aligned to any denomination. And by and large, the Christian initial teacher education providers are not absolutely aligned to a particular denomination, but a lot of Christian schools are. And Billy Graham noticed that after he had left and noticed he came back twice. Once he came back, the next time he noticed a huge decline in the number of people attending church. But there was an observation that there was a rise in the Pentecostal and charismatic that followed after that. And the interesting thing about that group is that the Pentecostals and charismatics were very, very rapidly rising. Instead of to become a pastor, you needed a 3-year degree in theology. Many of them were fast-tracked through. And in fact, there became almost an anti-intellectual attitude that fostered a fear of going to university, a fear that you would lose your faith if you went to university. Now, this has had a powerful backlash, if you like, on any of us Christian higher ed providers. And we're struggling to change some of the mindsets that even some of the churches have today in encouraging their flock to attend university, and in our case, to attend a Christian university. Now, back to our alumni. What does a Christian university produce? What kind of students or alumni, what kind of citizens do they produce? Now, it's interesting in the area of formation, and there were sort of 6 areas that they did the survey on. In the area of formation, they found that 74% of the Christian schools felt that schools had prepared them for most aspects of life. Whereas in the government schools, and it was a mix of Christian and independent schools and government schools, 51% felt that they were being prepared for life. Now, that's quite an encouraging result, isn't it? In terms of work readiness, the score wasn't as good. The score was that Christians coming from Christian schools didn't feel, they only felt 35% of them, that they were work ready when they left school. The independence was 48%, but it still wasn't as high as the state schools. The sense of belonging is interesting. Lots of volunteers and lots of ability to join groups, look after dogs, or look after people doing things with the environment, etc. But very little engagement in political and trade unions. Now, that's an interesting feature of how things get changed in society, and yet as Christians, our alumni is not currently engaged in that area. So you can see that as a school, we're very influential on how our society is going to be impacted by the alumni that we send out. Now, as far as religion was concerned, the millennials, which was the ones, as I said, the dominant age group of the survey, 25 to 30% believed God does not exist, or that God is a personal involved being. So that's across the board. As I said, it's a mix of Christian schools, independent schools, and government schools. So you've got already going out into society and even into some of our Christian schools and coming from our Christian schools, because not all Christian schools require you to believe in God. We've got this high proportion coming out that do not believe in the existence of God. So what are they believing in? Well, we understand pretty clearly what the sacred is. Those of you who are listening are most likely to. But the secular is what dominates, isn't it? The love and the worship of many of these things. And if I look at how COVID's treating sport and footballers, I can see that they certainly get worshipped. Now, I had a whole list of things which I'm flashing in front, but I think if you get the chance afterwards, you can have a look at this information as you're allowed to have the PowerPoint afterwards. But I want us to know how influenced we are by this post-Christian, post-truth era that we're in. What we find these days is that Christian schools create sacred spaces for kids. Now, this is a picture that was taken with September 11, which is now 20 years on. But when kids are frightened, when families are frightened, they looked at Christian schools. What do we do? What have we got? Even the non-Christians know that we've got something that is our comfort. Christian schools often teach kids from a young age to do outreach into underprivileged and disadvantaged and marginalised groups. Each of these have got stories to them. Christian schools help wrestle with the problems of what's going on in society, and sometimes through the very painful experiences that they might have experienced themselves, the kids rise up and become advocates. One of the things that N.T. Wright, and if you've get a chance to read some of his work, he talks about us participating in God's work in reconciling creation, God's people, and the environment, and the nations to himself. So that in the activities that Christian schools do, we are changing what is common knowledge. I wonder if you know that the Thank You Water people was a group of kids that came from a Christian school. You see, I'm not so worried about NAPLAN results. I'm not so worried about ATARs and HSC and etc. schools. I want to see a 30-something-year-old. I want to see how they're dealing with the stuff of life and the footprint they're leaving on the planet, because they're the ones that often are the fruit of the Christian schooling that they've had. So you might be sitting here and saying to yourself, well, I'm not really, am I Christian enough? Am I confident enough about theology? Do I know my Bible enough to teach kids? Well, never fear. As you do a course with us, you will be having opportunity to learn about God. There's units where you actually study theology and study your Bible. You'll obviously be trained in how to be a teacher, but also reflect on, is this really for you? You're part of a beautiful community of people out in the Christian schools that want you to become part of what they're doing as part of the wider body of Christ, as well as us here at Eastern. And as you know, we're all called to be salt and light in the world, and you're equipped for doing that, for going out into the world and making a difference. That's what you're going to get at Eastern College. And some of you might want to join with some of the Christian schools and do some overseas placements and help with literacy and language development and education with the disenfranchised overseas. So Australia needs graduates, Christian graduates. As we cast our eyes over popular culture and commercial news, we see more than ever the imperative for Christian schools to raise up critical thinking graduates of virtue and character who can shape the next generation of global citizens. And I love this quote from Pearl Esper. Only the brave should teach, the men and women whose integrity cannot be shaken, whose minds are enlightened enough to understand the high calling of the teacher, whose hearts are unshakably loyal to the young, whatever the interest of those who are in power. Well, bless you, everyone, and I'll pass back to Sarah now to see if we can look at some of the questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny. That was an excellent and inspiring presentation. Thank you so much. I particularly like the emphasis on how we teach from who we are, and also the role of Christian teachers to change what is common knowledge. What a powerful message and reminder that that's what we're about. So thank you for that. There are a few questions, so let's just go through these. But before I do, there was a couple of suggestions at what the first image might have been. There was a suggestion that it might be a machine to build a bridge. And then one of our attendees actually has ridden on it, and they've been on that. It's the Falkirk wheel. It's a canal lock. I'm also familiar with that. I haven't been on it, but this attendee has actually been on it. It's in Scotland. I just happen to know of it being a Brit. But anyway, so thank you for sharing that, Jenny. That was great.
Oh, well done. Well done. A lifelong learner.
So we have a few. It's really impressive. I'd love to write on it one day. We do have a few questions. The first one is great question. How is the Christian worldview practically outworked in education classes like maths and science?
And I'm going to go back to my screen share for a second, Sarah, to answer this one, which I thought I might have the chance to do. Let me go back to screen sharing stop. Let me try this again. I was going too fast. So one of the examples I wanted to give is this one here. Can you see that?
If you just put it to your presentation view.
Yes, so that's my challenge, is to get that.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
But can I make it bigger? Yes, I probably can. There we go. That's a bit better, isn't it?
Yep.
So here's a lovely example, and thank you for the person that asked this question. So here's a good example from a maths question. So a simple question: how many of you are buying milk today? This is a basic question, of course. And then a processing one: why are you buying milk today? There are more students in Mr. James's room than ours who are buying milk. Why are there fewer milk buyers in our room? But have a look over to the next one, which is where the Christian worldview comes in. What do you think would happen if nobody bought milk anymore? What do you think would happen if all the children in the world had all the milk they needed? Could you give some examples of countries where this is the case? So what Christian worldview is saying, God has got a purpose and plan for everyone. And there's a lot of people who are struggling, who are marginalised because of the powers and the agencies in the world. So you're taught to shed a light, to shine a light on injustice. You're taught to shine a light and come up with answers and get the children aware of, you know what, this isn't just maths you're learning. You're learning this maths because one day, or even tomorrow, you're going to have a situation where you're going to need to ask the question, is this maths correct? Is this fair when I make this calculation? Is this a fair result? So that's just one example. Would you like me to give another example, Sarah, or are you okay?
Oh, yeah, no, go for it. Another example would be great.
Well, this was fascinating, and if you get a chance to see this movie, it's just fantastic. This was a school in Tennessee, a middle school, where there was a lot of anti-Semitism and very, very outright racism. And the school principal, who you can see in the picture, was very disturbed by that. And through a chain of circumstances, she got the students to study up about the Holocaust. And very, very quickly, the children were researching and starting to find that there were people that were still alive. And so the kids were writing letters backwards and forwards, and they started to really get engaged with this topic. And she could start to see that the parents were also being influenced by this. Anyway, over a period of time, they managed to get someone from Germany, managed to ship out one of those remember the trucks that were taken to the furnaces, managed to chip out a truck at his own expense and to locate it on the school. And the children put in a paperclip for the 6 million Jews that were killed, one representing one paperclip. So you can imagine one paperclip in one of those big trucks. And of course, that wasn't enough. So they found that they ran out of paper clips in their little town. And then they found that they were getting donations from paperclip companies. And before you knew it, this became a stopping place for people passing by to say, look, and the kids' artwork was up there. The kids hosted it. They were guides for it. And I guess that's a beautiful example of what can happen, because Christian schools are about transforming not just the kids that are going to the school, but transforming communities.
Thank you, Jenny. That's great. Really inspiring story. Okay, we have quite a few other questions here. So another question is, if I studied Eastern, can I only get a job at a Christian school? Do you want to answer that one? Would you like me to?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, look, just want to let everybody know that absolutely you can teach across all school sectors in Australia. You would be qualified by the end of your course to teach in state schools, all independent schools, Catholic schools, and Christian independent schools as well. So it's not limiting at all. And we do have graduates that come wanting to teach in a state school, but wanting to have that Christian foundation for their career. And so, yeah, we have graduates across all of those sectors. So I have quite a few questions here. If you've already studied an education bachelor, so a Bachelor of Education or a Master of Education, can you do units or subjects in audit for a Christian worldview? I believe you've been involved in that with Jackie, is that right, Jenny?
So there's a core number of Christian worldview units that you can take, but there's a range too that you can take from the School of Theology, which we're sort of on the same campus with. So I guess your own faith journey will determine what level you want to study. Maybe your church has given you a lot of grounding and you just feel, oh, I really need to understand the Old Testament. So some of it is worldview. Generically, I want to know what different perspectives people come from and what informs their perspectives. Or there might be, no, I really want to study, I've always wanted to study Revelation. Or, so there's a sense in which what we're offering is a chance for you to grow in your own faith walk. Because as I said earlier, and Sarah, you picked up on this, we all teach through our own faith journey. And that's not something that stops, does it? It doesn't stop when you're 16. And maybe you gave your heart to the Lord at 16. Your faith journey hasn't stopped, has it?
No, absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, some other questions here. Sorry, I've got a number of different questions popping up. Okay. So will I be disadvantaged if I don't get my teaching qualification from a university or college that is more commonly known? There's a good question.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good question and it's a fair question. Look, I would say that I could tell you now across Victoria that one of the highest calibre teacher training outside of Eastern is Melbourne Graduate School. Now, Melbourne Graduate School intentionally doesn't take school leavers. It takes people that have already got a first degree. And I think that you need to, when you're comparing courses, it's not just about where they come from, but what has been the nature of the course. And there are employers that would prefer to have a mature age student. And so they're likely to go to the Graduate School of Business. But as Sarah's about to tell you, we have exactly that kind of course for people that are Christians.
Absolutely. So the MTeach that provides students with that opportunity. And quite interestingly enough, we actually have a number of students that come into the Bachelor of Education who have already started their careers in other areas, or even are currently working in schools. So they might be working as a classroom assistant or in some other area or some other role within the school, and they come as a mature student to complete the BEd so that they can then actually be teaching in the classrooms. So we do have a range of students coming from different areas, and I'm always delighted, when we have our graduates, to receive those emails from graduates saying, oh, I've got a position here, and I've got a position here, or I've got a position here. So we're really confident with our graduates' readiness to be, and ability to get teaching positions straight out of their degrees. And in fact, I heard the other day that one of our students due to graduate at the end of this year has already been employed by a school. And so, I don't feel that there's a disadvantage, although I do certainly acknowledge that people have some concerns around a name of an institution that might not be so well known. But yeah, as I said, our graduates are being established in a diverse range of school settings, and it's really exciting to hear their stories and how they're getting on.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, please.
Every university had to start somewhere, every university. So when I did started my PhD, it was at Deakin University, and I was the first group through that was doing a PhD in maths education. And then when I went across to Edith Cowan University to finish my qualification, because my supervisor went there, there had been no PhDs, because they'd gone from a college of advanced education to becoming a university. Now, everyone started somewhere, and I guess that's a part of our open day encouragement to say, where are you investing? Are you investing in growing Christian education? As Sarah said, there's no disadvantage. You cannot be qualified to teach without being compliant with all the regulations across Australia, and they're very, very rigorous, as well as all the regulations across Victoria. So I think park that in your mind. The Harvard and the Yales all started just like Eastern.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have, let me just see here. Thanks for that, Jenny. I have another question here. I'm not a Christian, but I prefer a smaller institution. Can I still study it at Eastern? And if I do, can I still get a job in a state school? Well, we have answered the question that yes, you can get a job in a state school, but also yes, you can study at Eastern. So we have open enrollments. So regardless of your faith background, you will be most welcome to put in an application to study at Eastern. Now, I think that's the end. Oh, actually, sorry, no, we do have another question. What is the difference between your Master of Teaching and Master of Education?
Well, that's a very good question, and we throw that word around. Do you remember when I was talking about Melbourne University, I talked to you about the graduate school. And so if you've got a first degree, you go into a master's. Okay, so the Masters of Teaching is still the initial teaching, and you need to have done a first degree, usually in some kind of area of specialism, but not necessarily. But if you're going to do Masters of Teaching secondary, you would have to have had your specialist subjects. So a 4-year degree is what you're going to get for a bachelor. And that would mean that you would have come straight from a school system or non-education, no higher education background necessarily. Whereas the Masters is presuming you've already got a first degree. That's a 2-year course.
Thank you. Now we had, I can't see any more questions coming up. There's a few things going into the chat, but I think they're being monitored by one of the our people in the background. So I don't see any new questions coming into the Q&A. So thank you, Jenny, for that. If anyone does have any other questions, please feel free to bring those up, and or you can pop them in the Q&A now. Oh, we do. We have another question has just come up. So my degree is in theology at King's College London. After my MTeach qualification, who will be employing me to teach religious education at secondary school? The school or the Diocese of Melbourne. I'm also a candidate for ordination. Great, well done. But yes, so in answer to your question, so Jenny, did you want to have an answer to that? So after my MTeach qualification, who will be employing me to teach religious education in secondary school?
Yes, thanks. You put that in the chat. I noticed that, Chris, and I can see now that that's also now in the Q&A. Look, it's a good question. It will depend on whether the school is offering religious education. And if it's a Catholic school, it's likely to want some Catholic distinctives and they may require you to do a unit or a couple of units. By and large, there are not a huge number of schools that actually have religious education. They will often use the chaplain to do that role. Sarah, do you want to chip in with that?
Yeah, I mean, basically one of the things that we aim for, whether you're coming in for an MTeach or a BEd, is that you graduate with 2 areas of specialization so that you actually have some flexibility anyway. So we encourage, in fact, we have a number of MTeach students who have joined the course. They have a background in just one subject area, and so they are completing another minor on the side so that they have that flexibility, which we would encourage across all teachers in secondary anyway, because you do often get moved around, and it obviously does make you more attractive as an employee. So we would, in this kind of situation, we probably would encourage you to pick up a second specialization so that you've got that to offer as well. And we do have a number of students who have got theology as one of their subjects. And of course, in your Christian independent schools, there are a number of schools that deliver a religious education and do have that taught by a specialist teacher in that area. So the opportunities are there, but certainly they are fewer. And as I said, that's why we always would encourage that you have a second specialization. And I think that brings us to the end of our questions. So yeah, we just want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Jenny, again for a fantastic presentation. I would like to remind you all that if you're registered for the Open Day, you will receive access to the recording of this webinar within the next day or two. And if you would like to discuss any other questions or study options with Eastern or MST, please do contact the college and arrange to have an appointment with someone. Someone will be very happy to speak to you about your, an answer to your questions or about what you might be interested in studying. So we hope you enjoy the rest of the Open Day webinars. Bless you all, and I hope to meet you sometime on campus. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.